Buddy, thanks for tuning in and joining us. And let me just give a few more minutes to make sure everything's working and people can come in. Okay, hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us. I'm Elliot Lovegrove. I was a Brandon Fellow last year at the Greenville Center for Creative Arts, and this summer I have a couple of classes scheduled on the roster, which we'll see how and when those can happen safely. But in the meantime, I'm going to be doing a demo from the bookbinding class. And so today what I'm going to be demoing is, wow, sorry, it's a little bit dark, but a little bit okay, I'll try to block the backlight. Today what I'm going to be demoing is making a small sketchbook that's bound in, we call a single signature. And yeah, you're welcome to follow along if you want, or just to watch. If you do want to follow along, let me just run through the supplies that you'll need. You'll need paper, obviously, to put in your sketchbook, and I'll say a word about that in a minute. Ideally, a thicker sheet of paper to be the cover, and then thread, some kind of sturdy thread to hold the sketchbook together, and then just the simple tools you need to make those happen. So the needle that will work with your thread, and then ideally a knife and a ruler, and something to cut on to cut your sheets of paper. I've got this self-healing cutting mat, which is awesome. It's like one of my favorite things, but also magazines work great. I've used those many times. So yeah, just whatever you're okay with having slash marks on it, and not worried about scratching. So those are the things we'll need. I will give you a minute to go get stuff if you want, or get set up if you want to follow along. And while I'm doing that, let me just add a couple of things about the materials. As far as what paper to use, you really can use anything. You could go get printer paper if you've got it around if you want. But the one kind of catch there is that printer paper and other cheap paper tends to have lots of acid in it, which means that it will turn yellow and brittle and start to disintegrate. So if you've probably seen an old piece of newspaper that's yellow and is breaking apart, and that's because of all the acid in it. So printer paper usually has acid and will do that. If you want your book to last a long time, then you want to get some kind of acid-free paper. It's easy to find. Any craft store will have it. Any art supply store will have it. Like Staples should have it, and it will just say on the package. But for now, really anything you can use. And if you just want to make a notebook to use for the next month, like, it will be no problem. And I'll try to point out along the way, like, as I'm doing things and using various tools, like which ones I think are really important and which ones, are maybe kind of nice but not crucial. Okay, so let's get started. So the basic process here is we're going to cut our sheets of paper to be an open spread of the book. So we need to cut sheets this size, and then we're going to fold them and sew them together. So as far as size goes, it's really up to you. Whatever size of paper you have, you can make a book that size. I'll just give a tip here that if you take an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and just simply fold it in half, it's a very recognizable shape. And so, it might look like a pamphlet at a conference or something, which is fine. But if you want it to look a little more individual and personally crafted, it can be nice to cut it a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do with mine. I have these kind of strange parchment-like sheets of paper, and I'm going to use these for my book. You only need a few, probably like 5 or 6 is good. And I am going to cut just a little bit from them, probably about 2 inches to make it a slightly narrower size. So this is the really big advantage of a mat like this. It has all these straight lines on it, which hopefully you can see from that angle. And so I don't have to worry about measuring and making the tick marks. I can just line up my ruler with a line 2 inches away from the edge of my paper, and I know I'll get a good, clean 2-inch cut. Blade against the ruler, just like that, and here's my first sheet. But you can also totally measure. That's fine. So I said I want to take 2 inches off, so I can just measure 2 inches in. Right, make a mark, measure 2 inches in up here. Lay my ruler across the 2 marks and get a nice clean cut that way. Once you have one cut, you can even just use this as a template, right? I can put this on top of my other sheets, line the ruler up with it, and cut them all to size. So however you want to do it, you just want to get a few sheets of paper. Again, like probably 5 or 6 is good. That will be the same size for your book. So let me do one more of this kind of parchment type paper. And then I always think it's fun, if it's just kind of like a blank notebook to write in, to mix in a few sheets of paper like from newspapers or magazines or something. So that's what I've got also in the stack. It's just some things to add like spice and color. You can see in this larger book that I made, and hopefully I'll be able to, yeah, there we go. I did all kinds of things like scraps from former drawings, legal pad paper, magazine pages. I think that's really fun, so I'm going to do a couple sheets like that. I think maybe this magazine page, and it's not quite the same size. I'm just going to make all my pages the same width, and then I'm okay if they don't line up at the top and the bottom. But if that matters to you, then you know, pay attention to that. So let me just cut 1 or 2 of these special sheets to include, and then we'll move on. Maybe just one more. I like this scrap from an old print. Oh boy, this one's so long. I'm gonna have to count a little more carefully. These get tricky because, you know, it's a different size, so it's not as easy as just cutting the 2 inches off. But I think this will work. And let me put all these paper scraps to the side and make sure that the papers that I'm going to use all line up nicely. And they do. That's good. Like I said, I'm okay with this, but you might not be. In which case, you can cut them differently. Okay, you know what? While we're doing this, let me also cut a thicker sheet for my cover. So I just have a pack of cardstock here. I'm going to get a piece of cardstock, and I like this green. I feel like there's a little bit of a geological theme happening here, so the green works with that. And so I'm just going to cut the cover to exactly the same size as a sheet, because I want it to just go on the outside like this. So actually, I don't even really need to line it up with that. I just need to make sure it's lined up with this paper that's underneath it. And I can go ahead and cut this one too. Okay, done. So now we've got all our pages cut, and now it starts to get a little more interesting, perhaps. So the next thing we got to do is fold them all in half. And you'll notice, if you look at this book, the sewing line goes right down the middle of all the pages. And so we have these folded sheets, and so a page of the book is actually half a sheet of paper. And that's one reason why we don't need so many sheets as you might think, because once we fold a sheet that we cut, we're going to get 4 pages of our book out of that single cut sheet. So, you know, I cut 6 things, but 6 times 4, that's going to be 24 pages in the book. So I'm just going to fold these all in half. It helps if you want to get a nice sharp crease to use the edge of your fingernail. Just run it along the fold like that. And you can get a nice sharp fold. So just fold all of your sheets of paper and the cover. And here's a good example of like kind of a really extra tool, which I might use for this thick sheet of cardstock. You can totally fold this with your fingers as well. Let me just make sure, yeah, this is the way I want it lined up. But this is called a bone folder, and it's just a hard, flat tool that saves your fingernails if you're going to be doing lots of folding, basically, and can help you press thick paper a little bit better. So I had to buy it for a book arts class that I took, and it's helpful, but I would say it's an example of something that's totally not necessary. Okay, so now we need to arrange our pages the way we want them in our book. So I just need to like nest these inside of each other, and you know, if you included any different pages, you'll have to think about where you want them to appear. Otherwise, if you cut all the same kind of paper, then you know you can just stack it, and it's pretty easy. And then put all of that inside the cover. So we've got kind of a V here of all these papers, and then I just like to make sure it kind of all settles. Okay, and so now we need to poke the holes that we're going to sew through, and you know what we want is for them to be evenly spaced out, right, and nice. So the best way to do this is to make a template and measure on the template. That way you don't have to mark up or fold up your actual book pages, and then you can line up the template here and poke your holes. The nice thing is, probably, if you cut your pages, you have a scrap. Like I have a scrap that is exactly the same height as my book from one of the pages that I cut. If not, you can just cut your own strip of paper. It just needs to be the same height as your book is going to be, and kind of whatever width. And then we're going to fold this in half too, because we want it to sit down in with the rest of the book. Like this. Okay, so now we're ready to mark where we want our holes to be. So with this, it's kind of up to you and just what makes sense based on how tall your book is. But we do want one hole in the middle, and then we want an odd number of holes. So this one has 5. I think I'm going to do 5 for this taller book as well. And my book arts teacher, John Andrews, shout out, had this philosophy that if we can avoid like measuring down to the millimeter with a ruler and just find a way to like use things to measure against themselves, we will, which I think is really nice. So to get that hole in the middle, I'm just going to fold this in half, and then I know that will give a hole in the middle. And then I'm going to go ahead and measure out. So I just want my 5 holes to go almost to the top and bottom, but not quite of the book. Like maybe leave a ½ inch of room. So based on how tall my paper was, I'm going to make one dot 1.5 inches away from the center and a dot 3 inches away from the center. And then I'm going to do that on the other side. Yeah, and then I'm just going to mark my center hole too. So I have, I don't know how well this will carry in the webcam, but just so that I have a pencil dot at each of these holes. And now I'm going to line it up with the rest of my book, and I'm going to poke holes. Now, here's another like particular bookbinding tool. This is an awl, which it's like, do you really need a tool to poke holes? But it is very helpful if you're going to do bookbinding. If not, you might be able to use your needle, and you might just have to poke through like 2 pages at a time rather than the whole thing. And you might just want to do it, you know, up like this rather than against a hard surface. But I'm going to use my awl and this scrap piece of wood underneath so I don't poke into my table or my cutting mat. And I just have my template lined up, and I'm going to poke the holes where I made those pencil dots, being careful to go straight down so that I go straight through all of these pages of my book and even my cover. And what that means is I'll be able to sew all of these pages together. All right, and then sometimes if I didn't get really cleanly all the way through, I will go back and, you know, make sure I get all the way through. Let me get back in the camera frame here. Yeah, and so now we're ready for the last step, which is to sew it together. So whatever thread you have, you can see maybe like this is a slightly thicker thread. It's not, you know, super thin. And we need to go down and back along the length of our book twice, basically. So I'm going to get 2 times the length of the book, plus, you know, it's always better to have extra than too little, so I'm going to do almost 3. And then cut off this thread. And then we're ready to start sewing. So I've got one of these larger needles, which can be helpful since my thread is a little bit thicker. And we already made our hole, so it's not like it needs to be super sharp to keep puncturing the fabric. So I just threaded my needle. And then we're going to start from outside of the book, and I'm going to go in through the middle hole. And one thing to watch for here is that I need to make sure that I come up through the center of the book. Like, I don't want to accidentally come up, you know, on the outside with some pages still hanging over here that the needle isn't going through at all. Like, I want to make sure that I'm going through all the pages all the way down to the very middle of the book, and coming out in the middle. So I'm going to pull through. Wow, maybe I should have made this hole a little bit bigger. It's a big needle. And leave some. We don't want to pull it all the way through. So I'm going to leave, you know, a few inches of thread hanging out. And then I'm going to start going up towards the top. So we're going to do a little bit of an under-over pattern. So I went in this hole, so I'm going to go back out this hole. And again, be careful that you're going through all the pages every time. So all the way to the center, all the way to the outside of the book. And then I'm going to go back in this hole here on the edge. Like that. Okay, and then I'm kind of just going to turn around and come back down. So I'm going to go back in the next hole down, and you can see like we're completing where we left a gap before. Then here's the one place where we break with the pattern. Instead of going back in the center hole, which would look like the logical thing to do, I'm skipping the center hole and going in the next hole over. So this is basically the only time we break with the pattern. Skip over the center and go in the first hole on the other side. So now I'm pulling it back out. And then we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to go back out the next hole, and now I'm all the way at the bottom of my book, and I'm going to come back going in the holes that I went out and out the holes when I went in. Pretty normal sewing process. And then because we skipped the center before, now I'm able to go back out the center hole again. So yeah, now as you can see, hopefully you can see, every stitch has thread going through it on both sides. And so now I'm ready to tie it off and finish the book. I just like to make sure that one thread is on each side of this where I crossed over the middle hole. And then we're just going to tie, you know, there might be some fancy knot. If you know a fancy knot, go for it. I don't. So I'm just going to tie like a normal, you know, pretty straightforward knot. And it's good to pull it tight. I actually wish I had pulled mine a little bit tighter, but that's okay. And then tie another knot on top of it just to be secure. And then there we have it. I mean, that's basically the book. You can cut off this thread however you like. I like leaving a little bit, so I'll maybe cut it right here and leave somewhat of a tail. And yeah, there's your completed book. So this may seem like a pretty basic technique, and it is, but the great thing about bookbinding is that like a few techniques can go a long way, and you can adapt them in a lot of different ways. And so this same idea of sewing the pages like will be the foundation for all kinds of things. You can, here's a book that I have, it's taken apart for some reworking, but it's just several of these sewn into a hardcover with cloth around the outside. But this same kind of thing, you can string multiple signatures together, which are these sets of bound and sewn pages, and make more complicated books. So it's a really fun building process from there. And if the class is able to run, and if you take it, then we'll cover all of those things. So thanks again for watching, everybody. Hope it was enjoyable and helpful. Hope you have a good weekend. And as always, stay healthy and safe. And I am going to come sign off. See you, everybody.